2, 1.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Patrick McNicholas. I am the creator behind Time Travel Tulsa and kind of a preservationist now too. We're going to be talking about the monument coming up. But thanks everyone for attending. It was good to talk to a few of you before. But let's give a quick round of applause for the Tulsa Historical Society for hosting this. And as he said, it was First Free Saturday, so some of my work as well as other stuff is throughout the building. Go check that out. I reached out to him earlier this year about this crazy idea that I had for a street sign presentation. And this is obviously not it. This was the story that happened before. So this is the article that I did in October 21. This is when I first learned about the monument. And this is an article to hear a short story that I did. And I wasn't tagged in a post until 2023. So I found it in May. This is actually it in October before it was cracked. So this is Google Maps. This is the image I was tagged in by a local historian. And I kind of wrote it off. I was like, the monument's gone. This is a tragedy. We lost another piece of Tulsa history. But people reached out to me and they were like, we can definitely find a way to preserve this. And of course, Benchmark stepped in a little bit later. But I went down there thinking that I could throw it in my car and just to save it because no one was doing anything. You can actually see it had been knocked over and the grass died here. So I'm kind of piecing all these little things together to try to learn about this mystery. But you can see, obviously, Tulsa's first street marker. We'll go more into the history, but this was just kind of baffling to me when I first found it, reading that and thinking they didn't have street signs until 1935. And again, the monument was placed in 1936. And again, we'll go into that. But I went in there trying to think if I could throw it to my car. There was actually some first responders there. And so I talked to them, and I was saying, can you guys do anything about this? I had to kind of knock on their window for them to roll it down. And they were like, call this number. They were doing paperwork. They had just doing something other than what I was interested in. They told me to call the 311 number, and I was like, well, I'm definitely getting nowhere here. But no, the 311 number definitely works. But I left it there on the sidewalk, and I was talking with people because I posted it saying, this is the end, and then everything started to change. And that's when we went down there, two friends of mine. This is actually the day. So this is us, my car's on the left, his car's in the middle there, but we took both pieces and transported it, held it at my house for a little while before eventually getting in contact with, again, the Route 66 Commission here in Tulsa, as well as Benchmark Monument, which we have a representative on behalf of Benchmark here today, but we'll talk a little bit of that when we go to the monument here in a second. But we got in contact with them. And they're along Route 66, on 11th Street, basically have been there for a number of decades. And so if anyone were to restore this, it would have been them. And so this is actually the moving day, and this is a few of our friends. This was last August, so it was 100 degrees plus. And this is a story that I did on my page, and it really kind of brought people's attention to the monument for the first time. But it's important because, this monument had been there for 86 years, and basically a lot of people had passed by not really realizing what it meant, what it was. And it's a significant part of our city because street signs, doesn't really sound like the most interesting presentation, but I can guarantee you what we see in this upcoming presentation is really just, like I said on TV, a comedy of errors, and it was just one thing after the other. But this is really a passion project. I've been working on this for over a year now, doing this research ever since the monument was really broken, and even before when I did the Tulsa People piece. But we're actually going to unveil this monument. So we're looking at these final images here. This is when we dropped it off with Joel, and he began the work, and we're going to see his photos in just a second. But what he was mentioning there, this is a marble monument, and there's actually fossils that were inside of this. So at first I thought it was basically the way the foundation came up through and held the monument in place, but these were actually fossils. So that was kind of an interesting thing, something you wouldn't have known unless it had broken. And then of course here they are at 11th and Utica, sorry. I should know that. I'm the street sign guy. So here's him putting it back together. He said he did this by himself. So you can see this is the monument before any really repair went into it. And this is where that break was. And we're going to mention all these people. But one thing that's interesting is like, here's the historical part, and then here's the credit part. So these are all the people that really put this together, and it was these people that wanted this monument. The city didn't even pay for this, to my knowledge. And Ben O'Angel was the street commissioner. But again, we'll get into that, but I wanted to show you how this repair kind of took place. So putting the two pieces together, he said he epoxied it together. And when you look at it here in a second, it's just amazing how far it's come. You can't even see, in my opinion, you can't really see the line, but of course if you work with stone, maybe you're more apt to see what's happening. But here he is in the workshop here. And I'm going to show you the foundation. So we are going to move this monument. Obviously it's here in Tulsa, the historical site today, but we're going to move this monument back to its location. And that's the original foundation. And one thing that Joel mentioned that was interesting, you can actually see, I was always curious what this white stuff was here. And that's actually over the years it had been painted so that it's more visible. And that's right there on Route 66 at 11th and Boulder. And that's where that curve is. So somehow it didn't get hit by a car for 86 years. But over there on the left side is where the actual street sign was placed. And so I'll be talking about that, but I think it's time to unveil the monument, so it's a little tough, but we're going to walk outside real quick and then come back in, and I'm going to switch it over to the historical side. Pretty big monument. When you see it in person, Joel, do you want to be over here? I think you should be. Yeah. We're going to help you pull it off because I want to be easy with it, but yeah, so I guess we'll just do like a 3, 2, 1 countdown. So 3, 2, 1. So yeah, you can just see there was a lot of damage, and like you said, it got painted over the years, but you can't even really tell that. But if you look at it real close, and you guys will have time to check it out a little closer. And then there's this plaque on the top, which actually shows two members handing a street sign to one another. So this monument is very interesting, and we're going to go tell the history right now. So we're going to take a few more steps and go back inside. Sorry about the inconvenience, but we wanted to leave the monument here because it's going to be here for the next little bit until we really move it back again to 11th and Boulder. So that's the monument. So yeah, my last presentation here is on YouTube as well, and it really talks about the initial project, how it got started and everything. But for me, each image starts with a photo, and this is the photo of those gentlemen that are named on the monument. And this is actually the first unveiling. You can see them holding a curtain there, and the foundation. And then the church here is still here, being renovated into a concert venue now. And there's the original street sign. So these were our first permanent street signs. West 11th and Boulder is above it. You just can't see it, kind of blends in with the rooftop there. It was really, when I first looked this up, it said first street marker, and I was thinking, what is a marker? I only really know them as signs, And then I put 2 and 2 together. It is a sign. There it is. It's in the frame. And no street signs until 1935, which to me as a historian, if it's the first street sign in 1935, I have to double check to make sure that's actually confirmed. And this is actually really the 4th iteration of street signs in Tulsa. So we're going to learn a little bit more about that. But on the monument it does say, or in the description on the Historical Society Museum, a monument at 11th and Boulder honors this project December 23rd, 1936, and that's when the monument was placed. So there's two dates on the monument, which makes it a little confusing, especially when you're telling the stories at 35, 36. The street sign was actually put up in 35. It was 36 when you had the monument. So this photo is that date. And the guy that you see is Mayor T.A. Penny right back here. Luther Williams, who reached out, a family member of ours, when the Tulsa Historical Society made a post, they reached out and gave us an exclusive photo that'll be in the presentation. And then these are the Junior Chamber of Commerce. So it was really Ben Angel, who is right here. He worked with the Junior Chamber of Commerce to really put this sign into work. And so we'll get into that, of course. But the two dates is a little confusing. And, there's been a lot of things about monuments and databases. This one wasn't listed anywhere. So when I first started researching it, I really had to go to newspapers and old accounts to really find out what this was all about. And like I mentioned earlier, there's more credit for the individuals than there is history on the monument itself. So here we go. 1901 is where we're going to start this story. We're going to end it in 1937, so I'm not going to the yield sign and beyond, but do check out one of two of the original yield signs is in this building. The other one's in Smithsonian. Is it still on display? Or? Oh, okay. Well, it's in the building. But street name, 1901, this is actually when they found oil in the Red Fork, so same year. And then the first street signs are installed in 1906. And a month later, they begin street paving. So paving, sidewalks, and everything, city improvements happen in conjunction, but not really realizing that they're working against one another. And so the sidewalks contractors eventually rip out some of the signs at no cost because the mayor didn't really enforce anything about it. But the remaining signs are rendered quote-unquote worthless on account of street name changes. So at the same time, a city that was only 1 square mile was growing at an exponential rate. And so this is when they first started with the idea of painting street signs on the curb. So here is that original town site. 1901, so this says 11th Street. And this would be like the Admiral area. So this was really even between the IDL kind of area. This was an article from 1942, and you see it says 21 square mile city today. So the 1940s, we're at 200 square mile, over 200 square miles in Tulsa today. And then this article from 1905, you can see, obviously, Main Street was kind of the main division line, as we know, east and west, and then the Frisco line was the division line, north and south. And initially, these streets north were actually North 1st Street, North 2nd Street, and then again, if it was on either side of Main, it was Northeast 1st Street. And so when mail was being sent out, it was getting all over the place. And they eventually, by 1905, started to say A Street, B Street, and then eventually it became Archer, named after prominent Tulsans in about 1908-ish. But yeah, there's like a lot of misconceptions when you read the history. It says cities east or west of the Mississippi River, and that's not necessarily true. It's just east or western cities. So these are the first street markers. And the proposed in 1905, but I really like this article, how it says city blows $700 a day. We're really interested in them at the time. There was actually 791 instead of 800, but oak posts that were 10 feet tall, they embedded them in the ground 3 feet, and they were blue body with white letters, which if you go anywhere in Tulsa today, honorary street titles are that color. So they were around 4 inches by 20 inches, again, white lettering, blue background. And they were set to last 5 years, guaranteed to last 5 years. Some of them really didn't even make it a few months. But this is a street sign of downtown South Main from the Frisco tracks in 1906. And in 1904, we mentioned the sidewalk contractors. They actually had a sidewalk ordinance. And so these are kind of wooden sidewalks that you see here. Still no pavement at all. And, people were kind of their own street signs. So you see a lot of these businesses, and any of these old photos, you see a lot of that kind of similar stuff. So here's the street paving, which again, that article, July 1906, this is August 1906. And that last one says, at the bottom, all the Tulsa is proud of its metropolitan appearance. And you can see the image there. And then this one says, an epoch in Tulsa history unquestionably marks the beginning of metropolitan life in the city. And so this is a pavement crew. This is actually them street paving a new road there. And I want to say that's on the west side of town, just to the west side of the IDL. And I just like the words that they use, epoch and history and stuff like that. And then the sidewalks came in. So here's an improved image, 1909. You start to see those concrete sidewalks on the far right. And then obviously trolley tracks and everything. But this was an article that I found amongst other articles from city people that complained about seeing these signs destroyed. And it says one can see hundreds of these signposts laying across the street. And so sidewalk contractors were accustomed to tear down these street signs and then fail to replace them. And so Newblock, who was the mayor at the time, notified these contractors that they must be replaced. But again, there was no enforcement that followed that. So many streets were left without signs once again. But there was a bigger problem: street names. So here is 1910 map of Tulsa, and you can see we've almost made it to the Arkansas River, but all these plots that you see here are annexed or will be annexed following. But these are the additions to the original town site. So people know Carlton Place. There's still an actual entrance that was there, and that goes back to even around statehood. But these are some, for Tulsa people, you'll notice a few names: the Perryman, Orcutt, which is Swan Lake area. And so this is just an idea. It shows how many different additions were added just within 9 years. And here's all the streets that don't exist anymore. Archer, again, was North First, so it had two different names as they were trying to switch it over to Archer. Berry was originally Admiral Boulevard. I had a few here to mention. I don't want to mention all of them, but Hodge. So Hodge Street, we'll be talking a lot about that somewhere. There we go. Continuation of First Street. And that Hodge, obviously Hodge's Bend as we know it on First Street, that goes back. This name was one of the hardest ones to kill, that and Cherry Street. But yeah, Hodge Street probably lasted until the mid-1920s, even though street signs and other signs said otherwise. But there's some other ones as well. And so basically right at the curve where you were to leave the IDL today, that's where all the names started to change. So you'd be on First Street downtown, then immediately onto Hodge Street. And there's maps from 1918 that I'll show you here in a second that show that. So 1913, the original street signs that were put up in 1905, most of the street signs put up several years ago have been rendered worthless on account of the street name changes. So they were dealing with this in 1913, and by 1915, again, like I said, that's when they started to begin the idea of painting, but they didn't even go with that. They actually put that, kind of set it on the side for the time being, and then came back for it. But the stop sign, invented in 1914 and finally implemented in the 1920s, so that was around this same period of time. But this is that map that I said from 1918, and as soon as you zoom in here, and I had a video of it zooming in, but I didn't really want to mess with it. First Street, right when you get here, you can actually see all the names change. So Hodge, Burnett, Collins, Query, all of these additions that were annexed. But you can see, the city's definitely growing, but it's still having issues when it grows out to this area. So initially on that last map, it said Cherry Avenue or Cherry Street was over here. But again, we know 15th's a little bit further today.
And this was a great article, poem that I found in the newspaper at the time. And this is, again, kind of the progress of Tulsa. We see somewhat of a street sign here, and I can't confirm that that's a stop sign, but it's some kind of traffic-related item. And it was actually a year before that a 20-block district in downtown got their first street lamps. And so we see one of these street lamps right here, and those were kind of like a 4-prong type lighting thing. And they were really short at the time. The lampposts they added later were much taller. But the poem itself, I posted it in the event page, so I'm not going to read it all, but you can see time for Tulsa to hand folks a treat by putting signs on each Tulsa street. 1918, so we're still not there yet, but this is where we start to see our first actual street signs. So this is a quote from Street Signs Are Needed, is the title of the article, March 1917. It says, "It is true that the streets of Tulsa have names, but they're recorded only in the city directory and telephone book. It is said some residents are uncertain about the name of which the street they live on. They may have heard it, but there's no proof of a thoroughfare with such name." And so imagine if you're having to call the ambulance, or if your house is on fire and you're trying to give them an address and they have no idea. The firemen were probably the best at the time of knowing what street they were on. But yeah, there was a lot of issues and emergencies that were not answered as quickly because of people really didn't know where they were, even if they've lived in the city for a number of years. But we're going to zoom in, and the street improvements that I mentioned, the light posts, the traffic lights, and the stoplights, you may have remembered, you may have heard of those. They were added in 1931. So we're not there yet, but that was the same year that you needed a driver's license to operate a vehicle in Tulsa. But the metal street signs, we'll see an image of them here in a second, but that was ordered in 1918. They forgot to put the east and west and north and south on the street, so they had to send the order back. They weren't installed until February of 1919. And then they finally decided to do the methodical street naming and adopting this thing for each time they annexed a new division, the name would continue on, and it still is that way today. The designs, this was one of the more interesting things, in the middle of the Great Depression, this is when we see billboard street signs. So there was advertisements on these signs, and they had a 10-year contract to have these. I'll get into that here in a second. But by 1934 is really when everything starts to change. We see Ben Angel, the street commissioner at the time, get with the Junior Chamber of Commerce, which is similar to like a Ty-Pros today. And they did that. Basically, the organization wasn't paid for anything, so they did all these work basically at no cost, which afforded the city time to figure this out. And then the street marker monument that we just unveiled was placed in 1936. So this is the second version of the street signs, and we see just a very small image of them. They were placed on the corner of buildings, and they were black with cut name out with white lettering on them. And this is again that last image that I showed you with the poem that was taken right here. So this is just up the street a little bit, and it says rust-resistant metal. The signs will be placed on the corners of buildings. And so I was going around town kind of working on a post as kind of a novelty post, and I ended up finding these signs at the old Elgin Hotel, which remained there until 1980. It is now an adult or a superstore of sorts. And I was, like I said, it was a novelty post, so I looked at the photo and then I zoomed in and I was like, oh wait, those signs are there. And this was actually after 1936, so they had street signs and they just kind of left these up. And looking through Google Maps and stuff, these signs obviously have been repainted and still that metal, but when I went up to it, you could see it embedded. But they were in every image of Google Maps that you can go back to. 2007 was the only one that wasn't there. So they must have been taken off briefly and then replaced after the modernization of the building. But that's an upcoming post. Let me get a drink of water real quick. Yeah, it was an interesting story. Still trying to figure out how they got there and everything like that, but so here is, let me get back to my notes. So yeah, dramatic inconsistencies of names across the city, mainly due to growth of the city and again the annexations of residential districts. Some streets had multiple names, including Archer, which is the longest street in the city at the time. It was called Archer, Baird, and Barton, and depending on where you were at on the street. So again, it goes back to kind of the emergency preparedness. But the Admiral Boulevard, like I mentioned, these are some of those same street names that took a while. And this kind of says, you know, this is 1920 again. Hodge Street holds its own despite its name being changed 8 years ago. And again, that continued on. Hodge was one of the ones. And then that same article, you know, a few months earlier, revision of streets names is needed to make Tulsa a city. And then that other one, reform without street signs, positively futile. So this is where we finally got the universal street naming, and this was adopted and designed by city engineers to rename the streets to make them more uniform and expand or infinitely expand as it grew. And it says confusion would be done away with, which we'll learn that's not necessarily true either. But street naming approved, and so both of those articles are from April 1926. But the issue was lack of funds, and so this is where, again, the street naming, the street signs were added to the curbs, and names would be painted on black with a yellow background. So these were on the curbs that existed in 1926, and mainly due to lack of funds. So yeah, you could see these around, but they only lasted about a year, and they would easily get weathered. And I have a quote for you coming up, too, of someone that had said an opinion on that. But here is the image of Tulsa in 1929. This is still before even traffic lights. So we see an intersection here. This is over by the BOK. It would be over here. But this was a smokestack, the PSO smokestack, which I did a post on. And a guy climbed 200 feet to the top of this, not even as a photographer. He was more of a stunt man. That's why he climbed it. But he actually had to go up 3 times to get this photo. It was from this location. It was actually a different photo. But you can see the 320 Boston building being made there. But these corners, you know, you can see a lot of gas pumps, just parking wherever you want. And but yeah, this whole area, I did another post, and I highlighted all the buildings that are still there, and there's only really a handful that are still existing in this area. The Mayo right here, Adams Hotel. So here's the advertising street markers, and you can see brings loud protest. So no one other than city leaders really wanted this, and the city leaders wanted it because they can save money. 3 votes are enough to adopt it. So if they actually would have went through with this would have been a 10-year contract with the local advertising company, and you would have the street title up here and then the advertisement below. So Joe's pies are better, smooth shaves. That may come in handy if you don't know where you're at. But yeah, that was a really interesting thing to see, and obviously, you know, during the Great Depression, but carrying both street names and miscellaneous advertising. And then eventually you see, after much protest, city says no to billboards. So flood of protest is actually what it says there. And let me see. So yeah, the company agreed to cover the cost for 5,000 of these signs, although it was a 10-year contract. And authorities believed it was the only major city in the nation to have such signs, but it turns out Veneta along Route 66 actually did this, and it was only for a short amount of time, of course. But many city commissioners, of course, favored the proposal, but the protest really is what brought it out. And that example, you can see it right there. Of course, these are the larger lampposts, and this is kind of how they initially went into putting the street signs in there. But this is really the turning point, or I guess one other thing. Other signs, once they decided against this billboard design, they actually started this idea with stone concrete markers. They were 3 times cheaper than any metal variant that they could find. And some were made from local rock, local sandstone taken from Sand Springs. Others were made of limestone, and we'll see a few versions of these here in a second. But it was after 8 years of the painted street signs that in the summer of 1931 is when we get this quote that I said I would mention. The quaint idea of painting street names on curbs hasn't worked out. We've lived here in the city for many years, and we have never yet seen a time when more than 30% of the street markers could be understood. So yeah, it was just, every time I found these articles, it was just bringing up more and more things. So at this same time, this is when the city commissioner, Ben Angel, who's on the monument itself, decides to join forces with the Junior Chamber of Commerce. And this is, again, kind of a civic organization for younger people. And they put together a survey that kind of surveyed different people in Tulsa and asked them, what street signs have you seen in other cities that you would like to implement here? And they also even did a petition, but they eventually had 10 of these street signs, and they were all concrete of sorts. We see 3 of them here. And believe it or not, this is actually at 21st and Peoria. You see the address here, so just right down the road. These were placed for about a month or so, and these were kind of designs that were under consideration at the time. And so I'll explain them to you. The triangle marker, the one on the far right, and so that's Ponca City limestone, black letters that are carved in it. And again, it's 21st Street in Peoria. The second one, we see the smaller one, is a 2-foot obelisk made of reinforced concrete, blue enamel plates. So you can it's a little tough to see, but there's actual plates that are embedded in this. You can kind of see where it would fit. And so these were one other versions of the signs. And then this was the one they called the tombstone. It looked like basically a tombstone. And again, you'd kind of have to read it vertically. So that was, I think, 3 feet. Let me see here. Tall pointed concrete markers, vertical letters. And again, other suggestions were made by the public. They wanted black vitrolite plates that were embedded on the curbs instead of the painted curbs. And they also had the idea of placing these metal signs, which weren't even in consideration yet, onto existing light posts. So in March of 1935 is when Angel announced that he would able to get $15,000 from the city budget, or wanted to get $15,000 for the city budget. But there was a lot I left out in here. There was, they were trying to get federal funding, obviously, from, the many alphabet organizations that existed at the time. But this is when he finally said, not tombstones, serious consideration into what type of marker without advertising, and no curb signs. So you can see they're moving forward. And again, the Chamber of Commerce put together a petition that was circulated to try to get the city in action. And then, of course, some more stuff here. But the Junior Chamber of Commerce gets 15 of these signs. And these are some of the first prototypes. And this has Ben Angel standing here outside of City Hall, looking at these different designs. And you can kind of see most of them look the same, but obviously 500 South Boston. Some of them don't even have South or East, just 6th Street, Boston. And then these are actually the poles that some of the people that manufacture these signs sent to us. 15 signs. Yeah, the WPA and federal assistance is what they were looking for, but they ended up just bypassing that altogether. The mayor at the time actually went to the White House looking to get funding and got lost inside the White House. And so, it was literally like, I didn't add that. There's a lot more, but so here's the actual placement of the sign, 1935. After months of funding issues, they finally found a way to pay for it, and they just basically took it out of their own street commission budget. So they basically, it costs about $13,000 or so. But they were estimated around 3,000 street signs to cover all intersections at the time. And these were porcelain enamel plates with blue backgrounds, white letters, and they were 9-foot pole. But we see them here. This is the one they decide upon. And Highway 66 to be designated first. And, that's why we got in contact with the Tulsa Route 66 Commission, put this together. And those images we were seeing, this is that corner. So this is where the street sign was, and this is where they would have put the monument a year later. So you see, and in this article, it talks about it being right next to Christmas, 2 days before Christmas. Ben O'Angel, who's the street commissioner, actually said he wanted to get it done before Christmas so that Tulsa could have, a Christmas present. And he did it just 2 days before. They were probably on vacation, but stuck around to get this. But I think it says, Santa Claus comes to town with a hammer. And so the Junior Chamber of Commerce were one that took a lot of credit for this, and this was the street marker. They ended up winning an award in Memphis for the Chamber of Commerce, like kind of meetings they do, but they won an award. And eventually, they thought about putting a monument on this corner, and initially it was going to be like a bronze plaque or a silver plaque. But they ended up with this marble monument that they put here. And on it, it says the greatest city improvement in 1936, because they put up nearly all 3,000 of those signs. But what was interesting, 16 months after this first sign was installed, so a few months after they put up the monument, 15% of those street signs were damaged by vandalism or people just not realizing that street signs were a thing and running them over with their car. So 15% of those caused damage to vehicles and whatnot, or the vehicles caused damage to the signs back then. But yeah, that's the actual photo that I used in the Tulsa People piece for that article that I mentioned at the beginning. And so returning the monument, this is that photo that I was talking about. Luther Williams, his granddaughter gave us this photo, and that's him standing next to the monument. And you can see the foundation at that time looks a little different than it does today, but the monument basically is still the same. And obviously we're going to return this to its original location, and you can follow that on our pages and whatnot. But yeah, other than that, trying to see, the pages that I do have are Time Travel Tulsa. I'm in Tulsa People magazine every month, and you can check that out on my page as well, just tulsapast.com. But like I said, we're going to return this monument. This is what it looked like before the damage. You just saw what it looked like after the damage and the repair. But yeah, other than that, I can take some questions if anyone has any questions. But that was basically, obviously there's more history that goes beyond 1937, but this is where I wanted to leave it because the research process was a little more in depth than I'd go with a lot of my projects or posts. And that's why I wanted to have this event here at the Tulsa Historical Society so that I can kind of show everyone what these articles that I found. And of course, a lot of them are newspaper articles, but that's where you can really look back into it because not everyone has the newspapers.com account, which is a great resource. That's where I found a lot of these newspapers. But yeah,